Hello there, people of the internet. People put way too much faith in things that they love. If they have a bias towards something, they're going to dump a lot of their faith inside of it and think that it can do things that it simply cannot, or think that they are skilled enough to do things with those things when they simply are not. So I figured I'd go ahead and I'd make this video talking about when it would be appropriate to use particular cartridges. A lot of times in my comments section, I will see people arguing over whether or not this thing is powerful enough to take this thing, and then the same people will go in and they're like, well, I can take this thing with this power, and it's just a mess. There's such a variety of different opinions that has accumulated into my comments section with just people who are under the impression that you need, 1,000 foot-pounds of energy to take down a deer, but then also people who say that you can take one down with a 22 long rifle no problem, and that's going to be like 170 something foot-pounds at the muzzle. So yeah, lots of arguments going on for both sides. So I don't really know where to begin with this. I am a military surplus channel. I do talk about some hunting stuff, and I do talk about some prepping and combat stuff, and I do talk about all sorts of different things. I am not ex-military, but I have used firearms for practical purposes and in practical senses, and I do have my own fair share of experiences. But all of that being said, I'm also young. At times of recording this, I'm 26 years old. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys, hey, I know absolutely everything in the world. There's people out there who just know dramatically more than myself. Ah, god damn it. I just got bit by one of those big tree ants. Well, fine. Fuck you too, pal. Oh, mama. That is really painful. Ow. Anyway, I know from my experiences that certain cartridges are just going to be better at doing certain jobs. Let me make sure that bastard's not in my pocket. Certain cartridges are just going to be better at doing certain jobs, and most of us tend to know that. But then there's people out there who just go to one particular cartridge to do absolutely everything, and that is not the mindset that you should have. Like, for example, I've actually got a couple of things out here. I'm going to grab this right here. YouTuber viewer, I'm sure you're watching this. 20-round magazine, semi-automatic, in full compliance with YouTube's community guidelines. If you are going to use something like a 223, there's a lot of really good applications for the 223 cartridge. If your application for 223 is to use it for defensive purposes, fantastic. Regular ball full metal jackets. If we're talking 55 or 62 grain projectiles, this stuff is cheap. It's very common. Like, it is absolutely everywhere. It's not heavy. You can carry a lot of this stuff. It doesn't take up much space. It's not a very big cartridge, but at the same time, it's not particularly potent. But if you're just going to be putting down two-legged predators with this stuff, I think it's absolutely powerful enough to be able to handle these things, especially if we're talking just regular common folk and not people who are, donning armor or anything like that. So something like this would absolutely be adequate for that particular application, especially if you're in a situation where you're going to be doing a lot of wandering or a lot of walking around or going through dense forests like what I have right there. If you're going to be doing a lot of walking and you need to carry a lot of ammo, I know a lot of people will carry the standard load of like 210 rounds, or I think that's the standard load for 223. They'll carry quite a bit of ammunition on them. That's a good application for this because it's a lightweight projectile that is actually quite significantly effective against the targets that it is intended to be used against. Now, all of that being said, I use this rifle and several other ARs that I have, and a Ruger Mini 14 actually. I use many 223 rifles for hunting things and for taking care of varmints and for doing all sorts of different stuff. Many times whenever I go after varmints, it's typically like coyotes or possums or raccoons, things harassing animals or getting into garbage or making a mess or just doing whatever it is that animals do. I'll use 223 to dispatch those nuisance animals, simply because they are small enough to be able to be dispatched by 223. One thing I do very often is I go pig hunting, And the potbelly pigs that are around here in the area that I'm in, they typically range anywhere from 50 to 80 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark. And I know for a fact that some 223 on one of those potbelly pigs, pretty much just one shot, and those guys are down exactly where it is that they were standing. They don't run, they don't do anything. This right here pretty much immediately drops them. So something like pig hunting or small game hunting, varmint taking care of, defensive purposes, those are all good applications for your 223 cartridge. Now, if I'm going after something like deer, the deer around here don't get very big. They're more often than not around that 150 pound mark. Sometimes you'll come across bigger ones, but more often than not, 150 pounds. And a 223 cartridge, especially if I'm going to rock like a 77 to an 85 grain projectile, those tend to do very, very well against your medium game deer. Now, I wouldn't necessarily take something like this up against your larger medium game or your large game. However, for the applications that I use the 223 cartridge for, this is absolutely 110% an adequate cartridge for those purposes. So if you like the 223 cartridge and you are like me and don't necessarily do things that require more horsepower than a 223, then by all means you can go ahead and use this as your one end-all be-all cartridge for whatever it is that you're doing. However, there are situations where the 223 is just not going to be adequate enough to be able to do the job that you're looking to do. For example, not too terribly long ago, I went to a gun range, and it was a 600-yard gun range. I brought my Ruger Mini 14 and 223, my TOZ 122 and 308, and a Mosin. I think I brought my M1 Grand. This was like 4 months ago. Anyway, I brought out a bunch of firearms, but I know that my 223 was simply not all that capable at touching out regularly at these long distances. I know I had my Ruger Mini 14, and I also brought one of my AR platforms as well. I can't remember which one. I think it was my Delton. Anyway, the 223 cartridge just was not all that capable out at those long distances. It loses its velocity pretty significantly at those distances, and so it's not a very heavyweight bullet. Once it loses that velocity, it loses its real effectiveness downrange. Granted, we were only hitting targets, so as long as you hit your target, that's what matters. You don't have to transfer a whole lot of energy to actually put down a target. But at long ranges, I noticed a significantly easier time making regular hits on target with my full power rifle cartridge than with a intermediate caliber cartridge. So if you're going out to long ranges, then a heavy power, full power, or a heavier full power rifle cartridge would probably do you better than an intermediate cartridge. So if you're somebody in the plains of the Midwest or something like that, then maybe a full power rifle would be more up your alley. And in a couple of months, at the time of filming this, it's September, so in a couple of months I'm actually going to be going up north for an elk hunt. I'm not bringing 223 to go on an elk hunt. I'm actually going to bring a 30-06. I'm going to be using 180 grain projectiles from my 30-06. And that is going to be a much better choice for taking out large game than 223. I have no doubts that with proper shot placement, and if you're up close and getting personal on the elk, that 223 would probably be able to put them down. But I have significantly more faith in something like 30-06 putting them down, especially since I intend to take shots at 300 or 400 yards. Now, all of this being said, I'm going to go ahead. Wow, that little bastard got me good. I'm going to go ahead and send a couple of rounds at 223 downrange. This right here is an excellent cartridge, but it's not overly powerful, but it's also not overly heavy, and it doesn't take up a lot of space, and you can carry a lot of it for not a lot of weight. There's a lot of good arguments for an intermediate cartridge as opposed to a full power rifle cartridge, but it's still better than, say, pistol cartridges. This right here is effective to significantly longer ranges than something like 9mm, even out of a carbine like this right here. So yeah, there are some pros, there are some cons. It's a good Goldilocks area. And for the most part, most people aren't going to have any issues with intermediate cartridges. Most people aren't going to be shooting at things like, 223 and 7.62 by 39 can't handle. Like, if you're going after large game for hunts, you are definitely the exception, and you might want a more powerful round. Most people aren't going to be shooting beyond 400 or 500 yards, which this right here should be adequate enough in. Just, this is a good cartridge for most people, but there are some applications where having a different cartridge would be more ideal, in which case you might want to go bump up to a better, more powerful, more capable round. Or maybe, I've used this example plenty of times before on the channel, maybe you're in an apartment complex or something like that, and an intermediate rifle cartridge might not be good. Then having some sort of 9mm PCC with frangible ammunition or hollow points or something like that to prevent over penetration, maybe that would be a better idea for you. You got to pick the right cartridge for the job, and I see in the comments, like, way too often, people going into the comments and they tell me that, hey, this particular thing is the absolute best, and I refuse to go with any other cartridges. Like, the number of people that go into the comments and they tell me I only hunt with 308 and I refuse to use anything else. That's great. 308 can do quite a lot of things, but if you go hunting pot-bellied pig around here, you know, a 60-pound pot-bellied pig with your soft point 308, then guess what? There's not going to be any pig for you left, buddy. Like, ask me how I know. You definitely don't want to go after smaller things with something like 308 if you intend on eating that thing afterwards. Yeah, there's literally going to be nothing left. Like, have you ever shot a watermelon with a 308 and just absolutely watch it go boosh everywhere? Yeah, well, a pig will do the same thing, especially with a center mass shot with a 308, especially considering the fact that, you know, here in the jungles of Florida, you never really make shots beyond 100 yards. I know I've never really made a shot beyond 100 yards. I think the farthest I've made is probably about 80. And 308 is a powerhouse of a cartridge in those short distances. So maybe you might want to consider using something besides your absolute all-time favorite cartridge if your absolute all-time favorite cartridge is not ideal for what it is that you're going after or what application it is that you're looking to use it for, or your location. Okay, I think I've made my point here. Thanks for watching, folks. Appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I will see you guys in the next episode. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garrett. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.